What's the real nature of the US-China trade war? Let me start with my conclusion. This trade war isn't just about tariffs or Trump's erratic policies. It's a continuation of the American Civil War, 21st century abolitionism. Sounds dramatic? Maybe. You might ask, isn't this just another round of Trump going after China? What's that got to do with slavery? Let me explain. To understand it, we need to go back, not to 2018 or 1972, but all the way to the age of exploration, when the Atlantic slave trade was booming. Many today, including Americans, believe African slaves were captured by Europeans using superior weaponry. That's not quite how it worked. In reality, only a small fraction of slaves were directly captured by Europeans. They quickly realized it was inefficient and dangerous. Buying was easier and cheaper. Who sold the slaves? West African tribal chiefs and kings. This is how the triangular trade worked. European ships loaded with manufactured goods sailed to West Africa. There, they traded guns, metal, textiles, sometimes alcohol, for slaves. Those slaves were then shipped to the Americas and sold. The ships would return to Europe carrying sugar, cotton, and tobacco. Before France and Britain outlawed slavery, it was legal and widespread around the globe, including China. Slaves were typically prisoners of war, or people punished for crimes or debt. These groups became the backbone of the transatlantic slave trade. That's why most African Americans today trace their ancestry to West Africa. You rarely see East African descent. Ethiopians, for example, have distinct features and a different history. Even now, some surnames survive. Take Bam Adebayo, an NBA star. Adebayo is a Yoruba surname from Nigeria. Here's a little-known fact. The country that imported the most slaves wasn't the United States. It was Brazil. Historian David Eltis documented that Brazil received over 4.8 million slaves, about 40% of all African slaves in the Americas. Why did Brazil need so many? Because of its economy. Its plantations grew sugarcane, coffee, and cocoa, crops that demanded massive labor. Sugarcane, in particular, had to be cut, peeled, bundled, and juiced all on the same day, or it spoiled. That required armies of workers, and, before machinery, there was only human muscle. So why didn't Europeans just use their own people, or Native Americans, as slaves? Because African slaves were more efficient. Here's where economist Chin Hui's idea of a low human rights advantage comes in, though he coined it much later. In simple terms, slaves were cheaper and more productive. This isn't speculation. According to Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Fogel and historian Stanley Engerman in Time on the Cross, plantation slaves in the American South were significantly more productive than free laborers. Why? No wages, no benefits. Their labor cost just 1/3 that of paid workers. Inhumane. Absolutely. But economically, it worked. That was the competitive edge. Sound familiar? That's the same logic behind modern manufacturing in China. Why is made in China everywhere? Because it's cheap. Back then, slavery was legally protected. Today, Chinese factories don't use shackles, but they operate under systems that suppress labor rights, household registration limits, rural workers' access to services. Their children are excluded from local schools, overtime often goes unpaid, and independent unions are suppressed. It's a modern version of the same principle. Maximum output. Minimal rights. Let's take it further. Imagine I'm a West African king in the 1700s. A European trader comes to buy slaves. I say, why haul them all the way to the Americas? So many die on the journey. Why not just build your plantations here? You bring the money, tech, and market. I'll manage the labor. The trader hesitates. Can you really run a plantation? I say, you're white. You bring black slaves into your country, and racial tension is inevitable. Plus, you live in a democracy. People talk about human rights and equality. Today you treat them like animals. But tomorrow, someone will demand fair pay, labor protections, even voting rights. You'll have revolts. unions, lawsuits, your whole investment will collapse. But here, I'm king. We speak the same language. There's no racial divide, no courts, no constitution. I can make them work 7 days a week with zero pay, and nobody complains. You don't get your hands dirty. I do the dirty work. You just sit back and count your profits. It's win-win. Sound extreme? That's globalization in a nutshell. What was the Atlantic slave trade? Globalization 1.0. And what is today's global supply chain? Slave trade 2.0. So yes, the current trade war is about tariffs and tech, but at its core, it's a fight over labor systems. It's a modern civil war, not between North and South, but between the global North and South, between free labor and controlled labor. And when you really study the history of the Civil War, you'll be shocked at how similar it is to today's US-China conflict. So what does this all mean? It means globalization today is not just about efficiency or cooperation. It's about who gets to define the rules of labor, production, and value. And the trade war, it's not just Trump going crazy. It's not just about chips or tariffs. It's the latest chapter in a centuries-old conflict, a global civil war 2.0. Back in the 1800s, the American South defended slavery by calling it a way of life and a necessary institution. Today, some nations defend ultra-low labor standards and poor human rights under the banner of economic development. Back then, abolitionists were seen as idealists threatening prosperity. Today, any call for fair labor, environmental standards, or human rights is dismissed as interference or hypocrisy. The logic hasn't changed, only the packaging. So when people say the US just wants to suppress China, or why can't countries just do their own thing and coexist, they're missing the point. This isn't about national rivalry, it's about economic systems. It's about whether the future belongs to high-cost, high-rights societies or low-cost, low-rights regimes. And that's why the current trade war feels so existential. Because deep down, we all know, it's about more than business. It's about values. It's about justice. It's about whose version of the world wins. If you look carefully, you'll realize that the US before its civil war and today's US-China relationship aren't just similar. They're mirrors of each other. Now put yourself in the shoes of a southern plantation owner in 1859. The writing's on the wall. Your slaves are fleeing, your profits are shrinking, and worst of all, some slaves are rising up. The John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry? That wasn't just an outlier, it was a signal. The system is cracking. Sure, Lincoln hadn't called for full abolition, yet. But from the Southern point of view, it was a slow boil. The North wasn't attacking slavery head-on, it was undermining it drip by drip, economically, culturally, ideologically. So Southern elites reached a chilling conclusion. If we don't spread slavery to the free states, if we don't turn the whole country into us, we're finished. Sound familiar? This is where the historical rhyme gets loud. The Chinese. Communist Party faces a similar trap today. For decades, the CCP had a dream: paint the world red. Export the revolution, infiltrate through ideology. But by the late 1970s, Mao's China was collapsing, so they hit pause, tucked the red flags away, and opened the doors, at least economically. But let's be clear, reform and opening wasn't a moral conversion. It was a survival strategy, and the West, America especially, walked right into it. We thought we were liberalizing China. In reality, we were feeding the beast. We trained their engineers, let them into our markets, let them into the WTO, and they used that access, not to become like us, but to build a more efficient version of authoritarian capitalism. We raised the wolf pup by the fire. Now it's grown strong, and it's biting the hand that fed it, and the hands of our allies too. Ironically, many Chinese people now feel trapped by their own regime. The stronger China becomes, the fewer outsiders are willing or able to step in and help. And in a bitter twist, that reality was largely built with American capital and Western naivete. So why do I say the CCP still has a way out? Because unlike the American South in 1860, China has a fallback plan. They can turn left, not toward full Maoism, but toward a hybrid system, tighter control, more economic centralization, more surveillance, a rollback of liberal reforms without full isolation. Think of it as a semi-open North Korea, one with container ports and 5G, but ruled with an iron fist. Living standards may drop, the middle class may shrink. But as long as the population stays quiet and the regime avoids war, the system can hold. That's a luxury the Confederacy never had. And here's the kicker. As long as Xi Jinping doesn't fire the first shot, as long as there's no Pearl Harbor moment, the U.S. can't go to war, not because we're weak, but because our system won't allow it. Xi can launch a war with a word, so can Putin. But in the U.S., even the president can't do that unilaterally. Not even Trump. That's the paradox of liberal democracy. It's stronger in the long run, but slower to react in the short term. And Beijing knows it. And that brings us back to the core dilemma. America built a rival it can't easily confront. And China built a system it can't easily escape. We thought engagement would bring convergence. It didn't. We thought trade would bring peace. It bought time. Now the game is changing, Xi Jinping doesn't need to win a war. He just needs to avoid one. He doesn't need to invade every country. He just needs to prove democracy doesn't work. And in that battle, the West is still playing defense. This is not 1941. There's no Pearl Harbor. No clear enemy lines. No easy slogans or victory parades. It's a twilight struggle, one of systems, narratives, and endurance. So if you're wondering why Washington seems paralyzed, why sanctions feel toothless, why Wall Street still dances with dictators, it's not just weakness. It's the cost of playing by rules that the other side never agreed to, and that's the lesson from the Confederacy to the CCP. When survival is at stake, authoritarians don't play fair, they play for keeps.